next week. I think our new quarter starts in July, and I will be in here teaching this class on Sunday nights. So encourage everybody, if they'd like to be a part of that class, to come back and tell you a little bit about it. It was in the bulletin, David. It didn't have listed our topic, but it is a book by John MacArthur called 12 Ordinary Men. And some of y'all may be familiar with that. I was set in with a class of that many years ago with a teenage class, and had a new youth minister, and he was teaching that class, so I sat in there with him, help out a little bit. But it was a very good study, and I've studied it off and on since then, but talking to Ben and some others about what we might study, and he said didn't think that had been taught here in a good while. But I think it's a very worthwhile study for us to go through, to know a little bit about those 12 apostles that Jesus chose, and a little bit about them, and a little bit about us. I think we can learn from those too. But if you would like to get the book, it's not required, but I think it would be helpful. Everybody needs a little library of biblical books on different topics, and this is a good one I think that you'll have. And if you'll read along with it before class, that will be helpful. I'm not going to be giving tests or anything, but will be good maybe if you could kind of look at that. And you can order them online. We talked about I talked with Ben. He said we might order some through church and let you get them from here, but it's probably just as easy if most of us are pretty good at ordering online, too good at it sometimes. So if you get on there and find it, you can usually find them pretty cheap for a paperback copy of that one. But it's called 12 Ordinary Men by John MacArthur, and we'll begin that study next week. It's a 12-week study, and I know we'll be out one for VBS, but I think we can make all that fit in there and do what we need to do anyway. But just put that in the back of your mind. I had some outlines of the lessons that are going to be, and I'll go ahead and admit that I went up to make some copies, and I jammed the copier up, so when y'all get in there to look at that, and that's what it is. That's got about 4 copies. And if it had been at work, I can take that one apart and put it back together, but I don't know this one, so I didn't want to mess it up more than I did already, so it's got a paper jam. I'm sorry. But that'll be coming up with us beginning next week. Before we get started, we're going to open with a prayer, and if anybody in particular that we need to mention in that, I know our crew is at camp this week, and always remember them in our prayers. We have several on our sick list. Yes, ma'am. So the McWilliams family, if you remember them in your prayers. All right, if you will, bow with me and we'll get started. Father, we thank you for the day, for this another beautiful Lord's Day, for the opportunity we've had to come out and worship you this morning, for the opportunity to come back tonight to learn more about your word. And Father, we know that there were forecast storms, and we've managed to dodge those so far, Father. We know we need the rain, and you'll send it to us as we have need of it. Father, that you'll be with us as we go through our class tonight, and pray that all the things that we discussed would be in accordance with thy will, and we could learn something more and apply it to ourselves, and also learn it to the extent we could teach it to someone else. Father, we have those who are not able to be with us tonight, especially it was mentioned the McWilliams family was involved in a serious car accident today. Pray that you'd be with that family as they are in the hospital in serious condition. Pray that you'd be with the doctors and the ones who tend to them, that they would regain their health. Father, be with all those on our sick list. We have many that we mention from time to time. You know who those are. Father, I pray that you'd be with them and for the ones who care for them. Father, be with Maywood this week. We know that is a great week that our young folks look forward to every year. It's a great time of spiritual just uplifting and time to be together, a little taste of what heaven will be like someday. Pray that you'd be with them, that much good would be done there this week. Father, go with us on throughout. Again, through the study tonight, on throughout the week, finally save us in heaven, is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. All right, our lesson tonight is kind of it may ramble a little, but it's just some thoughts that I had. On our Wednesday night class that I've been in, Will, my hands have been teaching it, and done a great job. And we have a very diverse group in there, from teenagers to those of us that hadn't been teenagers in several decades, but there's a wide range of people in there, but he does a great job with that. And we've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount and different lessons from that. And one that we did last week, and one that kind of made me want to dig a little further and learn a little bit more about it. So when we came up, that asked me if I would be available to teach tonight, and they said, well, you may not have a lesson ready. I said, well, actually, I do have something I've been kind of thinking about the last few days, so I'll go with that. So it's not polished, but it is some thoughts, and we'll share, and hopefully we can learn some from it. Start out with a question. What do you think is the most well-known Bible verse by the world? I agree. John 3:16. Those of us that are a little older, every NFL game or college game or any sporting event there for several years, there'd be this guy with a crazy rainbow wig afro out there, and he'd have a sign, John 3:16. It was always, and then a few years ago, when Tim Tebow played quarterback for Florida, and then a little bit in the NFL, but he was made famous. Players wear those eye black stuff underneath their eye, football players do, and now it's stickers they put on there instead of the old shoe polish type stuff that runs. But he had John 3:16 printed on there, so it got a lot of airtime. So that is, I agree, that is probably the most well-known. If somebody said, tell me a Bible verse by somebody that doesn't even claim to be Christian, they'd probably spit that at you. But probably the one that's used the most, and they can't tell you where it is one we're going to talk about tonight. And that is, judge not. People love that verse, okay? And the worse, farther away from Christianity they are, the more they like it, okay? Especially in our world today where, let me do my own thing, and, there is no truth. My truth is my truth, and your truth can be your truth, and there's no standard. That's a biggie. So we want to talk about that because it is a little bit misleading, I guess, maybe, or confusion would be a better word, I guess, to what that verse is talking about. So if you will, turn there to the book of Matthew and in chapter 7. And if you have your phone or your Bible, if you will, turn to that. And I'm going to be reading from a New American Standard Version, and I'll read a few verses of that. But our lesson in the class last Wednesday night, or whenever it was we studied that recently, was a few more verses from that. So we'll get into some of those. But verse 1 says, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." Verse 6 says, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." And then in verse 7, it talks about prayer and the golden rule, and goes through verse 12 with that one. And we'll come back and read some more of that. It's pertinent, but it is kind of the second part of that maybe we'll talk about if we get time. So let's discuss those few verses there a little bit tonight and talk about exactly what Jesus is talking about there. Like I said, it kind of is very popular today because it kind of fits in with two of society's big assumptions that they have today. And that is, number one, that religion is private. It's between me and God. You can't tell me how I should worship. That's between me and Him. And number two is that morality is relative. And that relative means what's moral to me may not be moral to you, but whatever. And that's how a lot of people like to look at it. That don't judge because it's a handy way of saying you can't tell me I'm wrong. And, if you do, then that's hate speech. And I'm glad to see lately, I seem to see it more in the last couple of weeks, especially this month during Pride Month, is that more and more people are kind of kicking back against that, and it's making more headway. It's where we're not taking that like we did there for a while, I think. When bad things happen, things that are become popular that are not correct with God, I think that gives us an opportunity to speak up, and I think there's a lot more people that are doing that right now. I've heard it even on, I was listening to a sports talk the other day, and the guy was talking about where, a lot of the sports teams, the pro teams especially, have their special jerseys that they'll wear for Pride Month where they've got rainbow numbers or something on there. And a lot of the pro players have kicked back against that. One of them, the first one was a professional hockey player. And he said, I don't believe in that, and I'm not going to do that. Y'all can do that, but I'm not going to do it. And from that, then several others said, okay, he stood up to it, I will too. because everybody's afraid of the cancel culture. Don't, if I'm against this and you're going to slap me down for this group that wants us to be tolerant, they're not tolerant if you don't agree with them. And, but it's got to be more and more. And these guys were talking about sportscasters that make their living off public opinion. We're standing up and saying on the radio, so, hey, I agree with them. We shouldn't. And they didn't go too far, but they went far enough. They said, I'm all right with them doing whatever they want to do, which I don't agree with that. He said, but don't make me tell you that it's okay. You can believe what you want to believe, but don't tell me I've got to tell you that's okay. And that was their take. So, that don't judge me kind of thing, don't tell me I'm wrong, that's very popular in today. So we hear this even more today, don't judge me. Jesus didn't really agree with that. You can see that. Like anything, you take a verse out of context, and they like to do that. But if we go down just a little bit further, those verses where we read to, verse 6 and 7 says, do not give what is holy to dogs. Do not throw your pearls before swine. Sounds like Jesus was judging. If we're going to decide who's a dog and who's a swine, then there's got to be some judging going on there. So, but what does the word judge mean? As I thought about this, I thought, well, we'd had a class recently about translations of the Bible. I was in that class, learned a whole lot with Brother Mike Brooks, and maybe that word, how is it actually translated from the Greek? And I looked that up, and I'm not a Greek scholar, but I can look it up. And basically, they said that word there that's used in this context from the Greek means to part, to sift, to divide out, to select, to value. But the most common meaning here is to decide or assess. So when he says not to judge, he's talking about decisions that we make. And we make a lot of decisions. Think about how many decisions you make in a day. I looked this up. I like mainly statistics, but it looked up and it said average person at their job will make about 35,000 decisions a day. So when you go home from work and you think about, man, I'm tired. Why are you so tired? How many decisions you had to make? Your brain burns 20% of the energy that your body produces. So you get tired from making all the decisions. As a teacher, teachers, they say they make 1,500 educational decisions a day as a teacher. And they say you make 226 decisions a day just about food. Okay, that's on average. I think I'm above average. I think about food and decide what I'm going to eat. Now, I start thinking about supper way before I even had breakfast, So, what are we going to eat? We make a lot of decisions. So he's not telling us that we don't need to make decisions. The point of this that he's trying to get across of it is how we discern, how we make those judgments. And he's not telling us that we're not to judge, because we have too many other verses in the Bible where we're told to judge. But it's how do we judge? How do we decide or assess? All right, and we want to get into that tonight, okay? Definitely, just to sum that up, he doesn't mean that we're just supposed to throw up our hands and say, okay, to each his own, who am I to judge? That's not why, as Christians, what we're called to do. And we'll talk about at the end how we are to do that. So our lesson tonight, really, we're going to look at four things. What he said, don't judge. Judging creates more judging. Why do we judge, and how should we judge? I'm going to end up with that. We're warned here mostly about making bad judgments and making any rather than making any judgments. The warning is whatever judgment that we use on others will be used against us. So if we're not merciful, we cannot expect mercy. If we're unwilling to give the benefit of the doubt, we cannot expect to receive that from others. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Okay, golden rule. That really sums up the lesson. I could close this and we go out, and that's the sum of it tonight. That's what it's all about. But the message he's getting across to us is not to judge, but how do we judge? And a better word to me, looking at this, and nobody asked me, but I'm judging, giving my opinion, but is condemn. Not that we're not to judge, but we're not to condemn when we see things. Even when we obviously see sin, that's God's job. He's condemned. I'm sure all of us have had somebody ask me, I don't believe like you believe. Am I going to hell? If any member of the church has not asked ever been asked that question, and you probably hadn't stayed with anybody, okay? And they want to know that. And standard answer for that is, I don't make those decisions. God does. I don't condemn you, okay? So we're going to look at some of that. But how do we judge? Do we judge properly? Do we judge fairly? Do we have pure motives about it? Do we show a spirit of forgiveness? Be cautious about our own problems that we have, and then stay humble. Those are some little things for us to throw out, and we'll come back to as we go through this. Okay? But psychologists say that the number one judgment that we make daily about people is, are those people good or bad, or can I trust them? Okay? We want to know whether we can trust somebody about it. If you meet somebody, and you have an interaction with them, can I trust you? We just recently bought a car, and I took a long time before I bought a car. I don't like buying new cars. I don't like it because, in most of those deals, somebody wins and somebody loses, and I seem to be the one on the short end most of the time. So I tend to drive one until the wheels fall off, okay? And I didn't do that this time, but I did. We'd been looking around for one, so I've been doing some research, and I ended up going back to the guy that I bought the last 4 cars I bought from because I know him and I trust him. I went to church with him. I was a neighbor with him. I taught and coached his kids. I know him. So I trust him. We've built that trust over the years. And when I go and I want a vehicle, then I know I can go to him and he's going to tell me the truth about it. And, if there's something I kind of like the looks of it, and he'd say, you might kind of want to steer away from that one, or, we hadn't had a good record with those or whatever. Or I can get you a better deal on something else. So, that trust. But even more intimate than that are coworkers. Now, people you work with, can you trust them? In too many toxic work environments we talk about, where you may have people at work that's trying to climb the corporate ladder, and they'll stab you in the back to get ahead. They'll make you look bad so they can look good. I've been fortunate not to be too many of those situations, but they're out there. Some of y'all may have, unfortunately. Can we trust our fellow church members? Can we trust each other? It's our spiritual family, so hopefully we can. I think we do. What about our spouses? What about our children? So in all those different situations, interactions you have with somebody, what kind of trust do you have? We were involved years ago when we lived in Gardendale, and had a class there for young marrieds, and we were young marrieds at that time. But it was a class called His Needs, Her Needs, and it was awesome. We learned a lot, and I did a lot of that. Kind of changed me and made me a better husband, I know. But it talked about that emotional or bank account that you have with everybody that you run into. You're either making deposits or withdrawals all the time, every interaction you have, and you're building that trust. Because occasionally you may have to make a withdrawal. If you got somebody at work, maybe there's going to be a time, especially if you're the supervisor, when you're going to have to tell them something they don't want to hear. But have you built up enough deposits that your account can stand that? You're not going to go bankrupt with that. So, what kind of trust do you have with those people? Like I said a minute ago, the problem comes with judging is when it creates a barrier between you and those people. If we judge that someone is undeserving of our time or our attention or our money or whatever, that kind of builds that wall, and you're not going to ever have too much from that. And going back to those relationships, if I'm trying to convert somebody, if I'm trying to get a study with somebody and teach them about Jesus and what they got to do for salvation, if I don't have a relationship with that person, probably not going to work very well. There's another book that was a class, and I've also taught, called Muscle and Shovel. It's pretty big a few years ago. A lot of y'all may have a copy of that. But the whole story of that is this fellow at work studies and converts a coworker who is in denominational. And first thing he does is establish a relationship with him. He says, "You're my new best friend." He brings him a donut. And he starts building a relationship. So you build that trust, and then you can get those deposits, and then you can say some things maybe that they don't like that may take a little hit to your account, but you don't go bankrupt. So as we come to this, if we're judging somebody, then we don't want to condemn them as we do that. We want to build that up. So think about this. If God did that with us, where would we be in our relationship to him? I can tell you, all of us, and I'm speaking for me, but I know y'all are like me, but we're way bankrupt when it comes to God. We have done so many more negatives, made so many more withdrawals from our account with him than we have deposits. But that whole thing is, when Jesus died on the cross, he paid all of it. for what we've done in the past, and the cool part is what we're going to do in the future. So as long as we're in a right relationship with him, that blood continues to cleanse us, which is a thing a lot of people don't come to understand. Too many people are judged themselves too harshly. I know a lot of people, maybe especially in their older adults who've led maybe a less than perfect life as young people and kind of sowed their wild oats. They say, well, God can never forgive me. I can never, I can never become a Christian and live that life because I've done too many awful things. You can't do, being mentioned and from the pulpit, I don't know if this Sunday or last Sunday, but like the last thing he did before he died was said, Father, forgive the ones who were killing him. We hadn't done that. None of us have done anything worse than kill our Savior, and he forgave those. So don't judge yourself too harshly. We can all be forgiven. So as we deal with people, build those relationships, we apply that same grace that we want God to have to us toward others. So condemning them or judging them kind of keeps us from doing that. So again, like we said, what is judging in general? It's making decisions. It's an act of discrimination of some sort. One definition says it means to separate, pick apart, pull apart, or choose. And we do that with everything. Like we said a while ago, what are we going to eat? We make those decisions every day. So based on this distinction, everybody judges. Jesus is speaking about judging in the sense of condemning another, saying that person is not worthy of my time. I'm writing you off. Again, we don't want to judge, but how we judge is how we're going to be judged. So we don't want to do that because we don't want God to write us off when we make mistakes. Again, he says, no judging ever about anything. Now, does that mean there's not times when you do? That's pretty much all I can do. We're also given instructions about that. Like he says here, we just read, don't cast your pearls before swine. They'll trample them underfoot. So there gets to be a point when you have to say, okay, I've tried. Now I've got to move on. Okay, and you've got to come and be part of this solution yourself. Okay, kind of like me and my wife was talking today about a little story where somebody was out in the Gulf and they were drowning. They got caught in a riptide. The guy went out to save them. And when they do that, and I'm not a lifeguard, but I've studied it before and know people who are, but one of the hardest things about saving somebody that's drowning is they're panicking. And if they're going under, they're going to grab you and pull you under too. So the first thing you have to do when you swim out to them a lot of times is push them away and spin them around so you can grab them. They're not fighting you and pull them in. And this one guy said he was trying to pull somebody in. He had to punch him in the mouth. He had to knock them, and while they were kind of addled, he spun them around, grabbed them, and then swam back to shore. But there's a point where they're fighting it. They've got to let you pull them in, okay? In Matthew 10:14, Jesus says, whoever does not receive you or welcome you, nor heed your words, as you go out of that house or out of that city, shake the dust off your feet. So there is a certain point where we have to make the decision, discernment, that that's all I can do, okay? But we don't make that up front. One of the big things here is Jesus says is don't judge according to appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. We read that in John 7:24. But there he's talking about if you have a banquet and you invite people in, that you don't, the guy that's dressed poorly, poor guy, you don't stick him down in the cheap seats and you put the guy that's dressed nice up here in the front. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have X-ray vision. We can't see through people like God can. He sees the soul. What we see is the outside, and too many times we judge based on that. And I guess maybe that's human nature. Maybe that's an excuse. I don't know, but we all tend to do it as humans. So I'm thinking that maybe it is. But we tend to look at people and what they look like on the outside. We've all heard the story told many times in church about the guy who came in, and he came in, services kind of started, and he kind of sat down in the back corner back there, and he looked rough. He had long hair and tats all over him, and leather jacket and boots, and just a rough-looking individual. And everybody kind of gave him the side eye a little bit there, like, who's this guy, and what's he doing in church service? And so then they got up, and the guy making announcements, and he said, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. So he's an undercover cop, and he's going to speak to us today. He got up and walked to the front. So this guy that everybody was kind of shunning because of how he was dressed and what he looked like, he was the preacher. Okay, well, John the Baptist didn't exactly fit the idea of a preacher. He was kind of rough, and I talk about when I teach sometimes about the Robertsons, the Duck Dynasty people. He says, I'm John the Baptist. I'm that rough looking guy, but I'm out there preaching to people. But we do tend to judge people on their looks, and too many times I think we kind of write them off up front. We make that judgment, condemnation that they don't want to hear what I've got to say. That person don't want to hear about Jesus. They don't want to hear about the gospel. They're entrenched in sin. But that may be the very person who is really looking the hardest, because most of us, we're not going to change until we hit rock bottom. That is human nature. That's proven through psychology. Is you're not going to hit a change until you have to. Usually, we like to do things the way we've always done them. Unless things get bad enough, we're not going to change. I'll give you a mild example of this, but when I came to UNA, me and two friends from high school came, and we lived in a dorm that first semester, and we had a corner room there where 3 people could stay in there. And you may know one of these guys, Roy Williams. He preaches now, but me and Roy was roommates, and also a guy named Scott Shirley, and we all grew up together and played ball together and all those kind of things. So we came to college together. Well, we kind of knew each other, so we had our own little friend group there. But we got in a routine where we would go out every Sunday night, and we'd go eat pizza. That was our kind of begin the week thing. We didn't have a whole lot of money to eat on the rest of the week, but we're going to eat pizza on Sunday night and kick it off to a good start, And we had run into this guy in the hallway there the first few days of school that lived on our same floor, and he was just he was not impressive. I don't know a better way to say that. He was not hip with the styles at the time. He didn't try to, he was just real quiet, kept to himself, was not a sharp dresser or anything like that. And we spoke to him and had to be friendly to him. One day he kind of invited us, down to his room. We went into his dorm room, and most people's got theirs all fixed up, and tried to be a little homey. His was like a prison cell. I mean, he had a bed and his books over there and not a picture on the wall or anything. It was just plain Jane. And we left out and we got talking about it, and we said, man, this guy, he needs a friend. So that next Sunday night, his nickname was Scooter. We said, hey, Scooter, you want to go eat with us? Yeah. He said, I'll go. So we took him, and we went, and we paid. Didn't ask him to pay. We bought his supper there. We did that for about a month, I guess, 3 or 4 Sunday nights in a row. And finally, we got to be kind of friendly. And we came down one Sunday night, and he said, and we was walking down the parking lot, and he said, y'all want me to drive tonight? And I said, sure. We figured he's in some old rattle trap truck. We'd probably have to jump him off. We get over there, we walk by this brand new, top-of-the-line, fanciest sports car you could think of. He stops and starts getting out his keys. We're like, Scooter, is this your car? Yeah. Okay. So we get in, and we ride, and we come back, and we said, Scooter, what's up? He said, that I don't understand. This don't make sense. He said, my dad's a rocket engineer. I'm from Huntsville, and said, I said, we got plenty. He said, I just don't care about stuff like that. And he pulled out his little scrapbook, and he had a jet boat and skis and whatever other toy you could think of, and a sports car. That was not, appearances were not big to him. He was a good guy. And he was like, some people just, love me for who I am, not for what you think I can do for you. I know, I think Sam Walton had that reputation. He was one of the richest men in America, but if you'd see him, you'd never know it. Drove an old beat-up truck and dressed just in work clothes every day. You wouldn't know he was a multimillionaire. He didn't ride around with a chauffeur and the finest of everything on. So that was not important to him. So, we tend to judge people the way they look, and that's what we told us here. Don't do that. And mostly, Luke 6:37, judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. So God doesn't want us to write people off. And that also includes the forgiveness part. So maybe somebody we have had an issue with. I hate to say this, but I've heard it whispered some before in church, like a person who went forward and asked for forgiveness. Maybe they've done that several times. People kind of started to think, what's up with this person? They keep going up and asking for prayers. That's fine. That's great. We should take that as a example for how we should do, because we're told there, how many times are we supposed to forgive? 7 times? No, 70 times 7. So as long as they're willing to come and try, we're to keep going with them. We should go that extra mile. We're told that's like the Jews were told, they were compelled to carry that Roman pack a mile, carry it an extra mile, go above and beyond. As long as they're willing to do it, then we're willing to work with them. So our judgment is not to condemn others. Those who are outside God, God judges. 1 Corinthians 5:13. John 3:16 or John 3:18. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the one and only begotten Son of God. Judging others, Christians, is outside our purview too, Romans 14:9-13. So what we are to do is share God's message with them. Prison ministry. I've never been active in that, I'll be honest with you, but I've thought about that. That could be a great thing. We've all heard the story, and it was really caught a lot of traction. Kids at school were talking about it a lot back in the fall. But all on TV about Jeffrey Dahmer. We're supposed to remember the Jeffrey Dahmer story. He was mass murderer, supposedly even cannibalistic to some extent. And when he was in prison, he reached out to a gospel preacher, Church of Christ, and told him he wanted him to come study with him, and he did, and he was baptized. And then he was later beaten to death. He killed in prison. But as far as we know, he was in a good relationship with God when he died. But this is a man who was very hard to forgive some of the things he had done on this earth. But God forgave him, and that preacher, and I can't remember his name, I should have wrote that down, but I do a little research on that when the kids started asking me about it. But, he said he even got some kickback from some church members, like, how could you go and preach to that guy? We don't get to judge who God forgives. We're to offer it to him. And this guy came asking. He was one of those 70 times 7. He was asking for forgiveness. I want to be a Christian. Tell me what's up. And he studied with him, and after a while, he was like Philip in the eunuch. What hinders me to be baptized? I want to be baptized. And he was. So a great story, a good example for us, that not to judge people, whether they're in prison or whether their record was or what they were convicted of or how they dress or what they look like, but give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's what we want. All of us want a second chance. And like I said, a lot of times that person who, the last one we think really wants it, they may be the one who definitely needs it the most, but also the one who's looking for it. But also, judging creates more judging. We'll read that there in verse 7-2. Many people want to judge without being judged. And Jesus says you can't do that. He says when you judge, you open yourselves up to being judged. So if we're going to have that haughty, condescending attitude, I'm better than you, then that's what's going to come back to us. So that's just basic fairness, We like for people to treat us the way we want to be treated, but too many times we treat them like they treat us. And that's not how we're told a Christian should be. They'll know we're Christians by our love. And that love is not just for our fellow Christians, which that should be strong, but it's to those outside who need it too. That's who we should be open with, and the ones who we try to help. So if you're going to evaluate somebody else, it's only fair that they evaluate you back. As a principal for a school administrator for many years, that was part of my job. We had a formal evaluation process that we went with. So we were trained how to do that, how to go into the classroom. We had this paperwork that we filled out in a way that we did, that we were to judge the way that teacher taught. But the whole deal of that, it was not a gotcha. And that's the first thing you tell the teachers is, this is not a gotcha. I'm not in here to catch you doing something wrong and chew you out. This is professional development. This is improvement. My goal is to help you improve and become a better teacher. And if you are, then you should want to hear my feedback. Okay? And that was, once you understood that, it went well. And there's a thing that some schools use where they call it peer tutoring, or not peer tutoring, peer evaluation, where teachers would go into each other's classroom with each other. And that was good. And really, they rather for the principal to come in as their colleagues to see how they were teaching. But it got those creative juices flowing, and you sharing ideas with each other about what's best practice and how to do things. But take that a step further, as a administrator and as a principal, it was only fair if I was going to judge them. So at the end of the year, I gave them a form to evaluate me. So we had several things to look at. What am I doing good? What am I doing bad? What do I need to do better at? And they were anonymous, so they filled them out, and I got them back. And they were they were accurate, But it's easier for me to sit in there and judge that teacher than just me to read my own evaluations, I'll be honest with you. Because sometimes they say things that are painful but true. I need to do a better job of that, especially the first year or two I was principal. Like, you spend too much time in the office, not enough time out in our classrooms. And, that was pretty common. The first part, you get so caught up in the managing the school that you forget to lead the school. So you got to be out there with the teachers and kids because you're there to support learning, and that's your job. So as us, if we should accept that evaluation as Christians, because we're always going to be judged harsher. People, if you identify as a Christian, then people are going to look at you, and if you make a mistake, they're going to say, aha, you did that. Okay, so that said, if you're going to judge me, I'm going to judge you back. So we have to be on our toes for that and be willing to, when we're called on it, to be willing to make adjustments when we need to, because we can all improve. There's all things that we do that we shouldn't do. All of us have our strengths. All of us have our weaknesses. And, if we're not willing to listen to somebody help us, then we should not expect them to listen to us when we come to them. And we're told in the Bible how to handle that. And I think that's off the subject a little bit, but that's probably one of the things we do a poorest job of is church discipline. We're told if we have a brother who's got an issue, we're told exactly how to handle that. I mean, the Bible is, some things you got to kind of read and study. You just got to read that. It's plain. You go to them. If you got a problem with a brother, you go to them. Take somebody with you. And it tells us step by step how to handle that. So we're to go to each other if we see somebody falling short and find out what's going on. And the other thing about that is we need to know why. And that I'm kind of skipping ahead in my lesson here, but that giving each other benefit of the doubt and being able to look beyond just the surface. Unless you walked a mile in somebody's shoes, you don't always know. Go back to teaching. When I first started teaching, I was hardcore, I'll tell you. I was very, very strict. And when it come to homework, if you had 25 items to turn in and they were due Monday morning, I wanted 25 items Monday morning. I want them done. And if you had 24 and you didn't have 25, you got 0. It's because you just either did it or you didn't, okay? And, there's a place for accountability, but truthfully, that's a little harsh. And as I taught and I learned to be a little bit more understanding and take into account what else was going on. You have that kid come in, they didn't have their homework. Why don't you have your homework? Well, came home from school yesterday, had on Monday, came home Friday night. Daddy has got his paycheck, and he went and spent it all on liquor, and he come in drunk, roughed up mama, run us all off. We slept in the car all weekend. Doing your math homework or your science definitions is not high on your list right then, okay? It's survival. So there are times when people do things or don't do things, and we may not know why, but we need to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. All right, where would I be if I had been in that same place? What would I have done? And read a little story from C.S. Lewis, and again, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. But he says, can we be quite certain how we should have behaved if we had been, now I wrote this in my handwriting pretty quick, so I'm going to read my writing. If we had been saddled with the psychological outfit, the bad upbringing, the power of, say, Himmler. Remember who Himmler was? Henry Himmler was the leader of the Gestapo, the SS for Nazi Germany. And he was the one who orchestrated the killing of all the Jews in the death camps. That was him. One of the worst people to ever live, probably. At least 6 million people died at his order. So we judge him harshly, but and this is an extreme example, I know, but this is C.S. Lewis' example, not mine. But he said, what if we had been in those same situations? What would we have done? And we put several of those Nazis on trial later after World War II was over with. And a lot of them's answer was, well, I was just following orders. Okay. But is that good enough? But if we were in that situation where if you don't do this, you're going to be killed or your family's going to be killed, how would we have behaved? I don't know. So try to give people that benefit of the doubt. He said, that is why Christians are not to judge. We see only the results which a man's choices make out of the raw material he was given. But God not judge him that way. He judges on what's been done with what he's got to work with. So I think that is a big thing for us to look at sometimes. That person may not be doing well. We may say that person come in, maybe they're coming to the Samaritan house or something. They need food and they need clothing for their kids. And we're like, this mother's a terrible mother. She can't provide for her own family, but we don't know what that family background was. Maybe another extreme example, but maybe if she's a prostitute on drugs. Well, maybe she was sexually abused and thrown out on the street when she was 12, 13 years old and had to survive. And now she's trying to do better, okay? So don't judge from the outside. Put yourself in that person's position. Try to consider, how would I have done that? When I was middle school principal, middle school is a whole different animal, especially middle school boys. And I had people ask me all the time, well, how do you deal with those 7th grade boys when they come in your office and they're sitting over there and they've done something stupid? And I said, I remember when I was a 7th grade boy and I was sitting across from the principal and I did something stupid. I said, I remember that. And the principal said, what was you thinking? I said, I wouldn't. I don't know. I don't know why I did that, okay? So, if you put yourself in that position, you can remember what that was like, or maybe you can't, was never in that position, but kind of think about that. If you judge, don't condemn, but offer forgiveness, offer help. What can I do to help you? I had a mother come to my office one time when I was new to principal, and I was not that old, but she broke down, and her child was in trouble, and she's like, I don't know how to be a mother to him. What do I do? That was tough. I'm aggravated at the child for what he's done in class, but the mother comes in and she says, I don't know what to do with him, and she didn't have the training from her parents to know how to do that, and she didn't know how to deal with her kids when they started doing that. So, my stance changed on that then, okay? Let me help you. Let me tell you what I can do. There's programs, there's things we can do to get you some help, and I'll work with you. And a lot of times when you do that, when you offer somebody that and you give them some grace that maybe they've never gotten before, it's amazing, even that hardened sinner, how they will soften and they will be receptive. Maybe they've never had anybody be kind to them or offer to help before. Sometimes those kids, when they're always in trouble, they're needing any kind of attention they can get, even if it's bad attention. And if you can give them a positive attention, they'll change. I kind of like those a little bit rough around the edges kids. They were easier to make a difference in their life sometimes than those who had everything to begin with. The ones who needed a little attention and a little help, those are the ones that was more rewarding to work with. So it's the same way with us as Christians when we're trying to work with people who need God. My dad, I guess, was a little bit of an example of that. My dad didn't grow up in the church. My granddaddy, I think he probably, I think Noah Webster made up a lot of the words in the dictionary, but if they had a cuss word dictionary, my granddaddy probably made up about half of those. He was a pretty rough guy. And Dad was not raised in the church, did not have, like I said, the same maybe background that my mother's side of the family did. And he could have a pretty bad temper at times, but after he became a Christian, he changed completely. Just driving. I remember when he used a hot rod, and he had hot rods, and he'd drag race and do all that. And no knock against Kenny, but when he got older, instead of driving fast, he got where he'd drive so slow he'd get on your nerves. Like, Dad, the speed limit's 50. We don't have to go 25. Let's go. So he completely changed from that and became and mellowed out. There toward the end. So people can change, all right? Depending on where they come from, where can they go? And that's the other thing God judges us not by where we are sometimes, but how far have we come? Where did we start at? We don't all start at the starting line. Some of us start way behind the starting line. Some of us may start at the starting line, but we got leg weights on and we're wearing a lead vest, and we got all these things we got to overcome before we can run the race. So, keep those things in mind. That's what he's telling us here when he talks about judging. Again, Jesus calls us to a higher standard. So whatever you men do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets, Matthew 7:12. And just as you want men to do to you, also do to them likewise, in Luke 6:31. So why do we judge? Why do we have that speck in our eye or in the brother's eye, but we've got the plank or the log in ours? It's a little easier to see the other person than it is us. Like I said a while ago about being evaluated by my teachers, that was tough, to look in the mirror and evaluate yourself. So sometimes it's easier to look at that other person because it distracts us from our weaknesses and our failures if we can look at them. And usually, as human beings, who do we compare ourselves to? If somebody doesn't want to come to church and you're trying to get them to come, or trying to study with you, they said, I'm not going up there. Oh, so-and-so is up there, and I see them out doing this and that and that, and they start listing all the things. Why do they always pick the worst member in the congregation? They'll never pick the best one. We don't ever say, oh, brother so-and-so, I don't want to compare myself to him because I look bad against him, so that we tend to like to look at people who are worse off than us, makes us feel better about ourselves. I've told this in here before, but the reason I like going to family reunions because I'm usually the skinny one there. My brothers are about one's about 300, another than 400. So at 250, I feel pretty slim when I'm around them. So who do we compare ourselves to? We don't like to look in the mirror. We get that beam in our eye, but I like my beam. It makes me feel good. It makes me comfortable. I like doing these things. My beam is not really a problem. That's that denial. Well, yeah, it is. Okay. That's self-deception. In Jeremiah 17:9, we said, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And then Jeremiah 10:23, O Lord, I know the way of a man is not himself, is not in a man who walks to direct his own steps. So we can't really go by what we think about ourselves. We need to see our reflection in God. What does it look like there? And as far as who we compare ourselves to, what does the word Christian even mean? What does it mean to be Christian? Christ-like, right? So that's who we're to compare ourselves to. And if we do that, we're never going to be good enough. But we're always striving for that. I hear a lot of coaches say that, says we'll never be perfect, but we're going to strive for perfection. And in striving for perfection, we will attain excellence. So we will be better than everybody else if that's our goal. If you set low goals, they're too easy to meet. If you set high goals, and that is to be perfect. I've heard Nick Saban, I told you I'm a Nick Saban fan, but he says, we don't practice till we get it right. We practice till we can't get it wrong. You do it over and over and over until it just becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it, okay? And that's how it is as Christians. We keep trying for that, and eventually we get better and better and better. In self-examination, that kind of makes us take responsibility for ourselves, test ourselves to know where we are and what we can do better. So how should we judge? Okay, kind of touched on that already. It says if we are truly interested in helping other people, we first got to get our own life right first. Okay, so that person maybe who has that speck, so they may be looking to get that speck out, but they need somebody who's got the beam out of there so they can see how to do that. They're looking for somebody who's got their own house in order, who's trying to do the best they can in order to help them become the best that they can be. Just remember that beam, that is me. It's an eye problem. It's an issue that I've got. And we'll all always have an issue. Even the best among us has problems. Paul said, as good as he was, he said, I'm chief sinner, okay? He said, I buffet my body. The things I don't want to do, I end up doing them. So he was just as sinful as everybody else. He had issues and things he had to fight to overcome. We've all got some weakness in our life that we fight with to try to overcome to make us better people. So is that big beam prevent us from being what the Lord wants? Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. If we're doing that, that takes care of all of it. If we are trying to help somebody because we love them, if we're looking after their interests, try to help them be better, and not to justify ourselves, then we can do that. The big problem that Jesus had with the Pharisees was they were hypocrites. They were always telling other people what to do and how to do it, but they weren't willing to do it themselves. And that was his big problem with them. He called them hypocrites over and over and over. And we've talked about this in class before here, but I think you may remember what that word hypocrite means. It actually means an actor on a stage. It's somebody up there playing a part. That's not who you really are. You've got your mask on. And that it's going to be hard to reach people if that is who you are. So what's the bigger issue? Person who is trying but makes mistakes, or the person who's constantly criticizing everybody else without working on themselves? That's not good, and that's what he's warning us about here. So kind of sum it up a little bit here. We got a few minutes left. But if we go back to verses 3 through 4, really, those are just encouraging us to be self-aware. So go back and look at those. That's where he talks about that's where he's talking about the speck in the log, or the mote, whichever version you got. But understand the position that you're in. Critically reflect on who you are. That's what he's trying to tell us there when he's telling that. He says, be sure that you're self-aware. Examine yourself first. Understand the position that you're in before you can help somebody else. Like we said, that person with a speck in his eye, they don't just want the guy with a log in it to leave him alone. He really wants somebody to help him, but he needs somebody who can see clearly. He needs someone with righteous judgment, not someone who's just going to make fun of him. That gotcha thing. Like I said, if somebody's doing something sinful, and we come at them with the approach of, I got you, I caught you, look how bad you are, that's not helpful. That's not the attitude we should have. We should come to them instead with, hey, man, let's pull you aside and let's talk about this one-on-one. What's going on? Can I help you with that? And maybe we'll understand why they're doing what they do. And there may not be a good reason, but we can understand it. But stepping on our toes here a little bit, some people would accuse the Church of Christ of really needing to hear this message that Jesus talked about here. Okay? Some people think that we have a reputation for offering harsh condemnations. I think that was true, especially maybe with the generation past, where, and I'm not against hard preaching, but I think maybe the church in general was guilty sometimes of coming down really harsh in their judgment of other people. And I think that's something that we can do a little better job of, kind of softening our approach, not softening our stance on what's right. We still need that. But I think as the church, we've been accused of that. So what should we do? Well, number one, we should uphold doctrine. Oh, anybody needs to take the Lord's Supper, you come. It's prepared in the room across the way right here if you'd like to. Okay. So finish up. So what we should do? Number one, we should uphold doctrine. That's never debatable. Okay. We should warn against bad behavior. We should condemn departures from the faith. And we should always speak the truth in love, recognizing that we must imitate Jesus not only in the content of our message, but in the attitude in which we present it. And I think that's the biggie. So again, we shouldn't back up on what doctrine is. We shouldn't soften that. You see too many denominations doing that. Name names, but the Methodists is having a huge problem with that now because they've had a group who wants to soften their stance on homosexuality and those kind of things, and they've got another group of people who don't agree with that, and they're splitting over that. So we should never soften on what's truth. We should always stand for what's truth. The biggest thing is, though, that it was our attitude when we teach it. We should always speak the truth, but speaking in love. Again, following what Jesus did. We know that all stand condemned, including ourselves. All have sinned and fell short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. And we rejoice that there are no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, Romans 8:1, because there's nothing that can separate us from the love of Christ, 8:35. We rejoice in the extent to which God went to redeem us from judgment, so that we, the recipients of mercy, could become dispensers of mercy. We seek to embody the words of Christ in James 2, verses 12 through 13. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty or freedom. For judgment will be merciless to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. So we should cultivate our posture toward the world and toward other religious groups, not of condemnation, but of compassion, thereby imitating our Lord who wept over Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, Matthew 23:37. So we'll kind of end with that thought. So how should we do it? that judging doesn't mean that we don't make discernment, that we don't call a spade, but it is in our attitude. Our attitude should be in love, willing to correct people when we see them sinning in order to bring them to Jesus. And it should also be with a spirit of humility and knowing that I'm a sinner myself and I'll fall short every day. And it's a lot easier for me to see that speck than it is for me to see the log in my eye. So as members of the church, hopefully that we will do a better job of that maybe we have in the past, for me particularly. Try to be a little less judgmental of people, give them that benefit of the doubt, the second chance, and always when I see something, try to not ignore it, but go to them with that in the spirit of love and with the idea that maybe I can help you, okay? And who knows, maybe they can help me back, all right, appreciate you being here tonight. As we said, look forward to beginning our new study next week. And if you want to order that book, remember it is by John MacArthur, and it's about the apostles. So if you will get that thing and get with it, it's called 12 Ordinary Men. And we'll begin that study next week. Thank you for your attention, and have a good week.